The worst betrayals do not arrive with shouting, slammed doors, or broken glass. Sometimes they arrive in a cream-colored envelope, placed neatly beside a half-empty glass of champagne on the happiest night of your husband's career. Claire Whitmore remembered the sound first. Not Ethan's voice. Not the applause. The sound of ice melting slowly in crystal glasses while everyone at Whitmore Tech Solutions clapped as if they had all survived the same storm. They had not. Most of them had only seen the polished version of the company, the one with a sleek blue logo, a renovated office in downtown Austin, and a CEO who knew how to smile at investors as if confidence were a financial strategy. Claire had seen the other version. The first version. The one born on a scarred kitchen table under a flickering pendant light, where overdue utility bills sat beside cold takeout, and Ethan's big dream depended on her ability to turn chaos into something banks and clients could understand. But that night, beneath the warm glow of recessed lights and the soft buzz of 30 employees celebrating their first profitable quarter, Ethan stood at the front of the conference room like a man accepting a crown. He wore the charcoal suit Claire had picked out for his first investor pitch 6 years earlier, the one she had paid to have tailored when they could barely afford groceries. His dark blonde hair was combed perfectly, his smile practiced, his hand resting on the shoulder of Vanessa Cole, the new marketing director, who laughed at every sentence as if she had personally invented revenue. Claire stood near the back, holding a plastic cup of sparkling water because she still had reports to review before morning. That was the habit she had never unlearned. Celebrate after the numbers are safe. Smile after payroll clears. Breathe after the client signs. Ethan raised his glass and said, "When I started this company, people told me I was crazy." A ripple of affectionate laughter moved through the room. Claire felt the sentence settle against her ribs like a small stone. I started this company. Not we. Not Claire and I. Not my wife, who built the client onboarding system, wrote the first pitch deck, negotiated the vendor contracts, and once wired $8,000 from her personal savings so the engineers could be paid before Christmas. Just I. She told herself not to be petty. Marriage, she had always believed, was not a scoreboard. Love did not need footnotes. But as Ethan continued speaking, thanking investors, department heads, and even Vanessa for bringing vision to the brand, Claire felt something quiet inside her begin to step backward. When the applause ended, people hugged Ethan. Someone turned up the music. Vanessa leaned close to him, whispering something that made him smile in a way Claire had not seen directed at her in months. Claire stayed until the last employee left, wiping a ring of condensation from the conference table with a napkin because some reflexes are harder to kill than hope. Then Ethan closed the glass door, turned the lock, and placed an envelope in front of her. "Claire," he said carefully, using the voice he used for difficult clients, "I think we both know this marriage hasn't been working." She looked at the envelope before she touched it. Her name was printed on the front in crisp black letters. Claire Whitmore. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not partner. Not co-founder. Just the woman he had learned how to remove from a sentence. Her fingers felt strangely cold as she opened it. The first page was headed Petition for Dissolution of Marriage, Travis County, Texas. For a moment, the office seemed to tilt. Through the glass wall behind him, the city lights of Austin shimmered like they belonged to someone else's life. Ethan kept talking, something about fairness, timing, emotional distance, two adults making mature decisions. His words moved around her without landing. She heard only one thing. The company had finally made money, and Ethan had decided she was no longer useful. Claire lifted her eyes from the papers. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not ask what she had done wrong, because some questions only give cruel people another stage. She simply looked at the man whose dream she had carried through debt, humiliation, and 6 years of sleepless nights, and asked, "How long have you been planning this?" Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time that evening, the great founder of Whitmore Tech had no speech prepared. 6 years earlier, before Whitmore Tech Solutions had an office, a payroll system, or a logo clean enough to impress anyone with a venture fund, there was Claire at the kitchen table in their rented duplex in North Austin, surrounded by receipts, legal pads, and a laptop with a cracked silver corner that overheated if she opened too many spreadsheets at once. Ethan had the idea, or at least the bright, hungry shape of one. He could talk about cloud-based workflow software with the kind of sweeping confidence that made people lean forward. But when they asked about pricing, onboarding, compliance, customer retention, or what happened after the first 30 days, his answers drifted into fog. Claire was the one who turned fog into architecture. She had been working then as an operations manager for a regional medical billing company, making $78,000 a year with decent health insurance, and a supervisor who kept hinting she was next in line for director. It was not glamorous, but it was stable, and stability had always felt beautiful to Claire in the same way clean sheets and a paid electric bill felt beautiful. Ethan called it safe. He said the word as if it were a small moral failure. "I need someone who understands systems," he told her one night, pacing barefoot across the kitchen tile while rain ticked softly against the window. "Not just someone I can hire. Someone I can trust." Trust. That was the word that opened the door. Human beings have built entire civilizations on worse judgment. So Claire, being human, walked through it. She took 2 weeks of vacation from her job to help him prepare for his first serious investor meeting. 2 weeks became a month of late nights. A month became her resignation letter, typed with a trembling hand while Ethan stood behind her rubbing her shoulders, whispering that someday they would laugh about how scared they had been. The first pitch deck was not his. Not really. Ethan wrote the opening line, something grand about transforming the future of small business operations. Claire rewrote the rest, cutting the buzzwords, adding market size, projected margins, customer pain points, and a 12-month rollout plan that looked responsible enough to make cautious men in Patagonia vests feel adventurous. She built the first financial model after midnight with her hair twisted into a loose knot and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She called clinics in Waco, San Antonio, and Tulsa, pretending her voice was not tired as she asked office managers what software they hated and why. She sat through demo calls, took notes, tracked objections, and built a customer onboarding checklist so simple that even Ethan could explain it without wandering into metaphors about disruption. When their first contractor threatened to quit because payment was 2 weeks late, Claire used $4,200 from her emergency fund, the one her father had told her never to touch unless the roof collapsed or someone needed surgery. Ethan cried when she told him. He held her in the kitchen and said, "You saved us." Later, when the company had a website, he changed that story. He told people he had survived by sheer belief. Claire did not correct him then. She was too busy making sure Belief had invoices, contracts, passwords, backups, and a working customer support calendar. Back then, Ethan still kissed the top of her head when she fell asleep beside the laptop. Back then, he still said, "we," without flinching. Back then, every sacrifice felt like a brick in a house they were building together. And Claire had not yet learned that some men will let a woman pour the foundation, raise the walls, install the wiring, and then hand her a guest pass when the lights finally turn on. The first lie was small enough to fit inside a single word. Mine. Claire noticed it on a Wednesday morning in March, 3 years before the envelope, while she stood at the back of a small conference room inside a co-working space off South Congress Avenue, holding a stack of printed onboarding charts that still smelled faintly of warm ink. Ethan was at the front of the room, sleeves rolled up, voice smooth, eyes bright, giving a presentation to 2 angel investors who had flown in from Denver. He was good in rooms like that. Claire had always known it. He could make uncertainty sound like courage and a spreadsheet look like destiny. "My company was built to solve the kind of operational mess small clinics deal with every day," he said, tapping the remote in his hand as the first slide appeared behind him. "My company." Claire felt the words, but only lightly, the way a person notices a cold draft under a door and decides it is not worth getting up. She told herself he meant nothing by it. People used shorthand. Founders used bold language. Investors liked confidence, and confidence rarely paused to distribute credit like Halloween candy. Humanity, apparently, could survive without precision when money was in the room. So Claire smiled when Ethan glanced back at her. She placed the printed charts on the table when he needed them. She answered a technical question when one investor asked how long implementation took for a practice with 4 locations and fewer than 50 employees. Ethan laughed and said, "Claire helps me keep the details honest." The men smiled politely. One of them wrote something down. "Helps. Not designs. Not leads. Not built. Helps." That word stayed with her longer than mine. It followed her home that evening, past the food truck lights, past the traffic on Interstate 35, into the kitchen where she reheated leftover chicken and opened the laptop with the cracked corner. Ethan was thrilled. He talked through the meeting while pacing in his socks, replaying every compliment, every nod, every sentence that suggested they might finally raise enough money to hire a full engineering team. Claire listened, corrected the cash flow projection, and tried not to make a wound out of a word. The next week, the pitch deck changed. The opening slide used to say Whitmore Tech Solutions, founded by Ethan and Claire Whitmore. Now it simply said Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Ethan Whitmore. Claire stared at it for almost a full minute before Ethan noticed. "It is just cleaner," he said, leaning over her shoulder. "Investors get confused when there are too many names up front." "Too many names," she repeated. He kissed her temple. Distracted, already reaching for his phone. "You know what I mean. You are part of everything. I do not have to put that on every slide." It should have bothered her more. That was what she would think later. It should have made her sit down with a lawyer, or at least ask for documents that reflected the life she was pouring into his ambition. But in that season, love still had the shape of teamwork, and Claire still believed that being essential meant being safe. Then, one Friday afternoon, an email arrived from the corporate attorney Ethan had hired after the Denver investors expressed interest. The subject line read Founder Equity Consolidation. Claire opened it because her name was in the thread. The message was brief, formal, and strangely cold. It referenced revised ownership language, simplified founder designation, and the need to avoid future confusion regarding operational support versus equity participation. Claire read the sentence 3 times. Operational support. That was what 6 years of skill could become when translated by a lawyer paid to protect the man standing nearest to the money. Before she could respond, another email arrived. "Sorry, Claire, wrong thread. Please disregard." She sat very still while the refrigerator hummed behind her, and the afternoon light moved across the kitchen table where the company had first learned to breathe. Then she did something so ordinary it would later become important. She did not argue. She did not call Ethan. She did not forward the email to anyone. She saved it in a folder on her laptop and named the folder Records. At the time, she told herself it was just caution. Not suspicion, not fear, just caution. But some part of her, some quiet inner witness that had been watching every small erasure, understood before her heart was ready to admit it. The company was growing, and Ethan was beginning to edit her out of its origin story. Vanessa Cole arrived at Whitmore Tech on a Monday in early September, carrying a white leather tote, a polished resume, and the kind of smile that made people feel chosen until they realized everyone received the same version. By then, the company had moved out of the co-working space and into a real office on the 8th floor of a glass building near West 6th Street, where the conference rooms had frosted doors and the coffee machine knew how to make cappuccinos nobody had time to drink. Claire had chosen the office layout herself, not because anyone asked her to make it beautiful, but because she understood how people moved when they were tired, how engineers needed quiet corners, how sales teams needed rooms close enough to leadership to feel important, but far enough away not to interrupt every crisis. She knew the building code, the lease terms, the printer password, the payroll schedule, and which client would panic if their Monday report arrived after 9 in the morning. Vanessa knew how to enter a room. That was her talent, and it was not a small one. She was 29, with pale blonde hair cut just above her shoulders and a wardrobe that seemed designed for cameras that were not there yet. Ethan introduced her during the weekly leadership meeting as the new director of marketing, brought in to give Whitmore Tech a more aggressive public identity. "We have built the machine," he said, standing at the head of the long table. "Vanessa is going to make sure the market sees it." Claire looked down at the agenda in front of her, where she had written implementation backlog, renewal risk, and Harrison medical follow-up in blue ink. The machine, apparently, had built itself again. Vanessa took the empty chair beside Ethan, though there were 3 open seats closer to the door. She listened with bright attention, nodding when Ethan spoke, tilting her head slightly when Claire explained that the product team was already stretched and that a major campaign could create demand they were not ready to support. "That is a good operational concern, Mrs. Whitmore," Vanessa said, her voice smooth as hotel lobby marble. "Maybe we can revisit it after we talk about growth." Mrs. Whitmore. Not Claire. Not Chief Operations Lead. though Claire's title had never quite caught up with her responsibilities. Mrs. Whitmore. The words landed gently, which made them worse. They reduced her entire history with the company to a wedding ring and a last name. Ethan did not correct her. He looked at the screen as if the quarterly forecast had suddenly become fascinating. After that, the shifts came dressed as efficiency. Calendar invitations that once included Claire began arriving without her name. Strategy lunches moved from the office to restaurants downtown, places with valet parking and menus printed on thick paper. Vanessa started presenting brand decks filled with phrases like category dominance and founder narrative, while Claire stayed late reconciling customer complaints created by promises marketing had made too soon. One afternoon, Claire walked into the main conference room with a folder of renewal reports and found Vanessa seated beside Ethan, showing him mock-ups for a national trade publication profile. On the screen was a photograph of Ethan leaning against a brick wall, arms crossed, eyes fixed on some imaginary horizon. Beneath it, the headline read, "The Founder Reimagining Healthcare Operations." Claire waited for Ethan to notice her. Vanessa noticed first. "We are in the middle of positioning," she said lightly. "This is more of a growth conversation. You probably do not need to stay." Ethan finally looked up, and for one foolish second Claire expected embarrassment, maybe even a laugh, some proof that he remembered the nights when growth had meant convincing one clinic manager in Lubbock to take a 30-minute demo call. Instead, he said, "Can you send the renewal numbers to my email?" "My email. My meeting. My company." Each word another quiet door closing. Claire stood there with the folder against her chest, feeling the air conditioning brush cold across her arms. Through the glass wall, she could see the office she had designed, the employees she had helped hire, the systems she had built humming around her as if they no longer recognized her face. She placed the folder on the table. "The numbers are not the problem," she said. "What we promise people and what we can actually deliver, that is the problem." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "That is why branding matters. Perception leads reality." Claire looked at Ethan then. He looked away first. That was the moment she understood Vanessa had not entered the boardroom alone. Ethan had opened the door for her, and he had done it because Vanessa gave him something Claire no longer did. Not love, not loyalty, not truth. She gave him a version of himself without debt, without doubt, without the inconvenient woman who remembered every mile of road before the applause. The Harrison Medical Group contract began as a yellow sticky note on Claire's desk, which was fitting because most real turning points in business do not arrive with orchestras or inspirational speeches. They arrive as unpaid invoices, missed follow-ups, and one woman noticing what everyone else is too busy performing success to see. Harrison Medical was a regional network of outpatient clinics across Central Texas, with 14 locations, more than 200 employees, and an operations director named Margaret Ellis who had the patience of a school principal and the email style of a federal subpoena. For 18 months, Claire had courted them carefully. She learned their scheduling failures, their billing delays, their staff turnover patterns, the exact reason their previous software vendor had been banned from 3 clinic break rooms by name. Ethan had wanted to push for a quick close after the second call. Vanessa, once she arrived, wanted a glossy campaign built around the phrase modernizing patient operations. Claire wanted to know whether Whitmore Tech could actually handle the implementation without damaging the client relationship before the ink dried. Naturally, hers was the least glamorous concern, which meant it was the only one keeping the company alive. She flew to Dallas twice on early morning flights, wearing the same navy blazer because it packed well and did not wrinkle under pressure. She sat in fluorescent conference rooms with clinic administrators who had no interest in being impressed, only helped. She listened. That was the thing Ethan never understood about selling to people with real problems. Listening was not a pause before persuasion. Listening was the work. By the time Harrison agreed to sign, Claire had rewritten the onboarding schedule, created a 90-day support plan, negotiated implementation milestones, and built a risk matrix so detailed that one of Harrison's compliance managers told her, "I wish your company had been here 3 years ago." Claire carried that sentence around for days like a small, private medal. Then the announcement came. Whitmore Tech had secured its largest contract to date, enough annual revenue to push the company into profitability for the first time since its founding. Ethan called an all-hands meeting. Vanessa ordered cupcakes with the company logo printed in blue frosting, because nothing says strategic maturity quite like edible branding. The office filled with bright noise. Employees gathered near the glass conference room, phones out, faces lifted toward Ethan as if he were about to declare a national holiday. Claire stood near the side wall with the signed contract folder pressed against her ribs. She had slept 3 hours the night before, after catching one last clause that would have left Whitmore responsible for a support penalty they could not afford. No one knew that. No one ever knew the disasters that did not happen because Claire had stayed awake. Ethan stepped forward, smiling with both hands in his pockets. Vanessa stood close enough beside him to be included in every photo. Today, Ethan said, Whitmore Tech becomes profitable. The applause struck Claire harder than she expected. It should have been joy. For years, profitability had been the word glowing at the end of every dark hallway. It had meant safety, proof, breath. She thought of the duplex kitchen, the cracked laptop, the emergency fund she had emptied, the weekends she had given up, the friendships she had let fade because Ethan's dream always needed one more hour. She waited for him to say her name. He thanked the sales team. He thanked product. He thanked Vanessa for sharpening the market message and helping the world understand the company's value. Then a local business reporter, invited by Vanessa for the occasion, asked, "Who kept you going when things were hardest?" Ethan looked across the room. For half a second, his eyes met Claire's. Something flickered there, not gratitude exactly, more like recognition trapped behind self-interest. Then he turned back to the reporter and smiled. "I had to believe in myself when no one else did." The room softened around him with admiration. Vanessa touched his arm, proud of the line. Claire felt the contract folder bend slightly under her fingers. It was such a clean theft, so elegant that only the person robbed could hear the lock turn. Afterward, the company issued a press release. Ethan Whitmore, founder and chief executive officer, credited visionary leadership and bold market positioning for the milestone. Vanessa's name appeared twice. Claire's name did not appear at all. That evening, when the cupcakes were gone and blue frosting stained the trash can liners, Claire stayed behind to upload the final Harrison implementation files. Margaret Ellis sent one email before 7 o'clock. "Claire, thank you for getting this done the right way. We signed because of you." Claire read it twice, then saved it in the folder named Records. Outside the conference room, Ethan and Vanessa laughed softly over a bottle of champagne someone had left behind. Claire watched their reflections in the glass, two polished figures celebrating a victory built on invisible labor. She did not know yet that before the night ended, Ethan would place another document in front of her. But some quiet part of her already understood that profit had not made him generous. It had made him brave enough to show who he had become. The envelope on the conference table looked almost polite, which made Claire hate it more. There was no dramatic flourish, no raised voice, no confession delivered with trembling regret. Ethan had waited until the office emptied, until the laughter thinned into elevator chimes, until the last paper plate smeared with blue frosting had been thrown away. Then he placed the envelope beside her laptop, directly on top of the Harrison implementation checklist she had built from scratch. It was so neat, so intentional, so embarrassingly corporate, as if the end of a marriage could be scheduled between quarterly reporting and a vendor call. Claire read the first page once, then again, not because she did not understand it, but because the mind sometimes circles pain like a cautious animal, refusing to step fully into the trap. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Travis County, Texas. Ethan stood across from her with his hands folded in front of him, wearing the strained expression of a man trying to look compassionate while protecting his assets. "I did not want to do it this way," he said. Claire almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because human beings had a stunning talent for creating disasters, and then asking to be praised for the packaging. "Then why did you?" she asked. His eyes moved toward the glass wall, where the reflection of the city hovered over the dark office like another witness. Because waiting would only make it harder. Harder for whom? The question landed. He shifted his weight. That tiny movement told her more than any confession could have. Ethan had rehearsed fairness, not truth. He walked her through the terms in the careful voice he used with nervous investors. The house would be sold. Personal property would be divided. She would receive a settlement that, in his words, would allow her to transition comfortably. Comfortably. There it was again, the soft language people used when they wanted cruelty to wear loafers and carry a briefcase. Claire turned the page. There was no mention of equity, no mention of founder contribution, no mention of the years she had spent doing work that had no title because titles cost money, status, and legal recognition. "Where is the company?" she asked. Ethan drew in a breath through his nose. "Whitmore Tech is not marital property in the way you think it is." "In the way I think it is," she repeated slowly. "Claire, you were never officially listed as a co-founder." The sentence was clean and cold. It had probably been written first by a lawyer, then polished by Ethan until it sounded almost natural. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she had mistaken for a partner. The expensive haircut, the tailored suit, the watch he had bought after the seed round closed, the tired blue eyes that once searched hers for courage and now avoided them because courage had become inconvenient. "You know what I did," she said. "I know you helped." Helped. The word returned like a door closing from the inside. She remembered payroll wires sent from her savings account, customer workflows written at 2 in the morning, demos saved because Ethan forgot which problem the product solved, compliance language she had learned on weekends while he slept. She remembered him crying into her shoulder after the first investor rejection, whispering that he could not do it without her. Apparently, he could divorce her without difficulty. "You built something beautiful here," Ethan said, as if offering a compliment at a funeral. "But emotional support is not ownership." Claire placed the pages back on the table. Her hands were steady now, which surprised her. Somewhere beneath the shock, something hard and useful was forming, not anger exactly, not yet, but clarity. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Ethan looked at the folder, then at the floor. "That is not a productive question. It is the only productive question in the room." He said nothing. In that silence, Claire saw the timeline assemble itself. The wrong thread email. The revised pitch deck. Vanessa entering meetings Claire used to lead. The press release with her name missing. The celebration held before the execution. This had not been an ending he stumbled into. It had been a strategy. Claire closed her laptop, slid the divorce papers back into the envelope, and picked up the Harrison folder beneath it. "I am taking the weekend to review this," she said. Ethan's face tightened with the faintest irritation, as if she had missed her cue to collapse. "My attorney will expect a response. Then your attorney can practice patience. I have been doing it for 6 years." She walked out past the empty desks, past the logo glowing blue on the reception wall, past the office she had designed to make other people believe in Ethan Whitmore. In the elevator, with the contract folder held against her chest and the envelope under her arm, Claire finally let herself breathe. The doors closed softly. For the first time that night, she was alone with the truth. He had not just asked for a divorce. He had tried to erase the witness. By Monday morning, the divorce had already become office weather, invisible but pressing against every wall. No one said anything directly, because corporate people have mastered the sacred art of pretending not to notice a house burning as long as the calendar invite still says Team Sync. Claire walked into Whitmore Tech at 8:15 with her laptop bag on one shoulder, the Harrison folder in her hand, and the envelope of divorce papers sealed inside a plain canvas tote. The receptionist looked up too quickly, smiled too carefully, then looked down at her keyboard as if typing could save her from moral participation. In the kitchen, 2 engineers stopped talking when Claire entered. Near the sales bullpen, someone whispered her name and then coughed, the universal workplace signal for guilt without courage. Claire poured black coffee into a paper cup and carried it to her desk, where 3 calendar invitations had vanished from her morning schedule. Executive brand alignment. Investor narrative review. Gala preparation. She stared at the empty spaces on her screen, each deletion small enough to deny and clear enough to wound. At 10:30, Ethan sent a message asking her to join him in conference room B. Vanessa was already there when Claire arrived, seated with a tablet in front of her and a pale pink notebook placed precisely beside it. Ethan stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, looking down at traffic on West 6th Street as if the city had personally disappointed him. "We need to discuss Thursday," he said. Thursday was the Austin Innovators Gala, an annual event held at a downtown hotel where venture capitalists, founders, consultants, and people who used the word ecosystem without irony gathered under chandeliers to congratulate one another for disrupting industries that still sent invoices by email. Whitmore Tech had been invited because of the Harrison contract and the profitable quarter. Claire had assumed she would attend as she always had, quietly, professionally, making sure Ethan remembered names and did not overpromise implementation dates after 2 glasses of sparkling water. Ethan cleared his throat. Given everything happening between us, I think it would be best if you did not represent the company at the gala. Claire looked at him. I negotiated the contract they are honoring. Vanessa's smile appeared gently, like a knife wrapped in tissue paper. No one is questioning your contribution, Mrs. Whitmore. We just want the evening to feel forward-looking. Forward-looking. Claire wondered how far forward one had to look before the past became legally invisible. And who will answer operational questions from Harrison if they come up? She asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. I can handle Harrison. Can you? The room went quiet. Vanessa glanced at him, then back at Claire. This is exactly the kind of tension we are trying to avoid. Claire set the Harrison folder on the table, but did not sit. Tension is what happens when the story and the facts stand in the same room. Ethan's expression hardened, just briefly, before he recovered his founder face. You are making this personal. She almost smiled. There it was, the oldest trick in the manual. Take a woman's labor, remove her name, profit from her silence, then call her emotional when she notices the receipt. It became personal when you put divorce papers on my work, she said. Be hard watching him become successful without you. For 1 second, the room narrowed to the rim of her glass, the scent of citrus in the air, the distant flash of Vanessa smiling for another camera. Not correct, Vanessa. Not there. Not with wine glasses clinking and investors pretending not to listen. Truth, Claire had learned, was most powerful when it arrived with receipts, not volume. She left the gala after 40 minutes, before dessert was served, before Ethan could corner her near the elevators and ask why she was making things difficult. Outside, the Austin night was warm, the air heavy with the smell of rain on hot pavement. She drove herself home in silence, past restaurants spilling music onto the sidewalks, past couples laughing under string lights, past a city that had no idea a woman in a black dress was carrying the first clear shape of her own rescue. The duplex was gone now. So was the larger house she and Ethan had bought after the seed round. Claire had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment near Zilker Park 2 weeks earlier, telling herself it was temporary, though the stacked boxes in the living room already looked like a verdict. She set her keys in a ceramic bowl her mother had given her and stood for a moment in the quiet. The apartment smelled faintly of cardboard, lemon cleaner, and the lavender candle her sister had insisted would make the place feel less like a witness protection program for divorced women. On the floor beside the sofa was a gray plastic storage bin with a cracked lid. Claire had packed it in a hurry, sweeping years of papers from desk drawers and file cabinets, because something in her would not let her leave them behind. She knelt and opened it. At first, it looked like clutter. Old notebooks, printed contracts, USB drives, bank statements, drafts of pitch decks with coffee rings on the margins. But as she lifted each piece into the lamplight, the clutter arranged itself into a history Ethan had forgotten she knew how to preserve. There was the first customer discovery spreadsheet, created under her personal email before Whitmore Tech had a domain. There was the original pricing model, with her formulas still embedded in every tab. There were screenshots of text messages from Ethan at 2 in the morning, saying, I do not know how you keep saving this, Claire, but please do not stop. There was the bank confirmation. From the December payroll transfer, $8,000 from her account to the company account, labeled temporary bridge, though it had never been repaid. She found the wrong thread email from the attorney, printed and folded once. Founder equity consolidation. Operational support versus equity participation. She placed it beside Margaret's message from that evening, the one she had forwarded to herself before leaving the gala. We signed because of you. One by one, the documents stopped being memories and became evidence. Claire made 3 piles on the floor: financial contributions, intellectual work, client relationships. A 4th pile formed by accident: Ethan's admissions. The apartment clock ticked toward midnight. Her knees ached. Her coffee went cold. Outside, rain finally began to tap softly against the window, the same patient rhythm she remembered from the old kitchen where she had once believed love made paperwork unnecessary. By 2 in the morning, Claire had filled a new folder on her laptop. She named it Records, then copied it twice, once to an external drive, and once to secure cloud storage under an account Ethan had never touched. When the upload finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the evidence spread across the rug. She did not feel victorious. Not yet. She felt awake. For years, Ethan had treated her work as something soft, domestic, impossible to measure. But there it was, in dates, dollars, emails, signatures, and client names. The truth had not disappeared. It had been waiting for her to stop asking permission to find it. Claire did not file a lawsuit the next morning, which disappointed the dramatic little courtroom in the back of her mind, and probably would have disappointed half the people who later heard the story. Revenge, in real life, rarely begins with a judge and a wooden gavel. It usually begins with a tired woman making coffee in a one-bedroom apartment, opening a spreadsheet at 6:40 in the morning, and deciding that panic is a luxury she can no longer afford. Claire spent the weekend organizing the evidence, not because she wanted to destroy Ethan, but because she had finally understood the difference between being kind and being unprotected. By Sunday night, the rug in her living room was covered with neat stacks of documents, each labeled with blue sticky notes: client acquisition, financial contribution, product operations, written admissions, Harrison Medical. Her sister Allison came by with takeout from a place on Barton Springs Road and stood in the doorway staring at the piles as if Claire had accidentally assembled a small federal investigation between the sofa and the television. "Please tell me you have a lawyer," Allison said. Claire looked up from the laptop. "I have 3 consultation appointments this week." And after that, Claire clicked open a blank document. The cursor blinked on the screen, patient and judgmental, humanity's smallest metronome of unfinished business. "After that, I build something that has my name on it." She did not mean it as a grand declaration. Her voice was too tired for grandeur. But once the sentence entered the room, it stayed there. On Monday, Claire met with a family law attorney downtown, a calm woman named Patricia Mendez who wore gray reading glasses and did not waste sympathy where strategy was needed. Patricia reviewed the documents for nearly an hour without interrupting. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. "This is not just a divorce," she said. "This is a contribution story, maybe an ownership story, depending on what we can prove. But you need to understand something. Men like your husband count on exhaustion. They count on you settling because fighting feels too expensive." Claire looked at the box beside her chair. "Then I need to stop being exhausted for a while." Patricia smiled faintly. "That would be ideal, yes. The legal system has not yet developed a discount for emotional devastation." For the first time in days, Claire almost laughed. But even as Patricia prepared the response to Ethan's settlement proposal, Claire knew the divorce could not be her entire future. She needed income. She needed structure. She needed a place to put the part of herself that had spent 6 years saving a company that now pretended she had only answered emails. So she returned to the beginning. Because beginnings were one thing Ethan had not managed to steal. She bought a used desk from a retired accountant in Cedar Park, carried it up the stairs with Allison's help, and set it near the apartment window overlooking a line of live oak trees. She opened a new business registration with the state of Texas. The name came to her while she was rinsing a coffee mug at midnight. Whitestone Strategy Group. Not Whitmore. Not anything borrowed from a man who thought ownership was just a signature on paper. Whitestone. Clean, solid, difficult to move. Her first website was simple, almost plain. Operational strategy for growing companies that cannot afford to mistake momentum for stability. It was not flashy. Vanessa would have hated it, which Claire took as an encouraging sign from the universe. She emailed 5 former clients and contacts. Careful not to violate any agreements. Careful not to sound bitter. Careful because women leaving powerful men are often expected to be legally perfect while the men enjoy being merely misunderstood. The first reply came from Daniel Price, the operations director of a small logistics software company she had helped during Whitmore's early days. His message appeared at 9:12 that night. "Claire, I was wondering when you would finally do this. I never hired Ethan. I hired the system you built." She read the sentence once, then covered her mouth with her hand as her eyes filled. Not because it was enough. One email did not pay rent, win a divorce, or repair 6 years of erasure. But it was proof of something Ethan had forgotten to calculate. People remembered who solved their problems. Within 2 weeks, Daniel became her first client. Within 3, A second referral came from a clinic network outside San Antonio. Claire worked from the used desk, wearing sweaters and old jeans, her hair clipped back, her coffee going cold beside the same cracked laptop that had survived the first version of Whitmore Tech. Only this time, every invoice carried her company name. Every proposal listed her title. Every contract had her signature exactly where it belonged. She was starting again from a kitchen table, almost. But this time no one else was standing behind her, waiting for the right moment to call it his. For the first month after Claire opened Whitestone Strategy Group, Ethan seemed to mistake her silence for disappearance, which was a mistake men like him often made because silence had served them so well before. While Claire worked from her used desk near the apartment window, building client workflows under the patient shade of live oak trees, Whitmore Tech continued performing success under brighter lights. Vanessa announced a new brand campaign with sharp blue graphics and phrases so inflated they seemed to require their own oxygen supply. Ethan gave interviews about scale, resilience, and founder vision, words that sounded impressive until placed beside the actual support tickets multiplying in the system Claire had once managed like a second nervous system. At first, the cracks were small. A clinic in Round Rock waited 3 days for an onboarding answer that used to arrive from Claire before lunch. A billing supervisor in Temple received the wrong implementation calendar. 2 product updates were promised to Harrison Medical before engineering had approved either one. Vanessa called it momentum. Ethan called it growing pains. The clients called it unacceptable because clients, unlike founders on magazine covers, rarely enjoy paying 6 figures to become unpaid beta testers. Inside the office on West 6th Street, the air changed. The cappuccino machine still hissed. The logo still glowed blue on the reception wall. But the easy confidence had thinned into something brittle. Employees began asking who owned decisions that Claire used to make without drama. Meetings grew longer and solved less. Vanessa pushed for a national webinar series before the Harrison rollout was stable, arguing that visibility would attract strategic partners. Ethan agreed because visibility was easier than repair. Repair required humility, documentation, and the unpleasant admission that someone no longer in the building had understood the machinery better than the man claiming to have invented it. Then came the signature error. Ethan, eager to prove he could handle operations without Claire, approved an accelerated expansion clause with Harrison Medical that required all 14 locations to be live within 90 days. Claire's original plan had allowed 180 days, with stage testing, staff training, and compliance checkpoints. 90 days was not ambitious. It was a calendar wearing a blindfold and driving on Interstate 35 during rush hour. Margaret Ellis sent the first warning email on a Tuesday morning. Ethan replied with polished reassurance. By Friday, Harrison's Dallas pilot site had logged more than 60 unresolved setup issues, including permission errors, duplicate patient intake fields, and a reporting delay that made one administrator call the platform beautifully branded confusion. Claire heard about it from Daniel Price, who had heard from a consultant, who had heard from someone at Harrison, because business gossip moves through Texas faster than summer heat through a parking lot. She did not smile when she heard. That surprised her. Some part of her had expected satisfaction, a dark little spark at the sight of Ethan discovering gravity. Instead, she felt the old reflex to fix, followed by the sharper memory of the envelope on the conference table. She closed her eyes, let the reflex pass, and returned to her own client dashboard. 2 days later, Margaret called her directly. Claire let the phone ring twice before answering. "I hope this is not inappropriate," Margaret said, her voice clipped but tired. "But I need to ask whether you are still affiliated with Whitmore Tech in any operational capacity." Claire looked at the Whitestone contract template open on her screen. "No, I am not." There was a silence on the line, heavy with information Margaret had probably already guessed. "That explains more than it should." Claire said nothing. She had learned that quiet, when used correctly, could make other people tell the truth without being chased. Margaret exhaled. "We signed because of the implementation plan you built. That plan is no longer being followed. I am sorry to hear that. Are you available as an independent consultant?" The question entered Claire's small apartment like a gust of clean air. She looked at the cracked laptop, the used desk, the stacks of careful contracts that finally carried her name. "Possibly," she said, "but I would need to review the scope, and I would need clear authorization from Harrison not Whitmore. That can be arranged. By the following Monday, Ethan was on a conference call with Harrison's executive team, Vanessa seated beside him with a notebook full of defensive talking points. Margaret did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Our board has requested that Claire Whitmore review the implementation immediately, she said. Ethan's face tightened. Claire does not work here anymore. Margaret's reply was calm enough to be devastating. Then maybe we do not either. In the silence that followed, Ethan looked across the conference table at the empty chair Claire used to occupy, and for the first time, the profitable company he had claimed as his own began to feel like a machine, missing the only person who knew where the wires were hidden. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, which meant everyone arrived by 8:45 wearing the faces of people who had slept badly but still believed a pressed shirt could conceal institutional panic. Ethan entered the largest conference room at Whitmore Tech with a leather portfolio under one arm and Vanessa beside him, both of them moving with the rigid confidence of passengers pretending the plane was not making that sound. The long table was already occupied. 2 board members sat near the windows. Patricia Mendez, Claire's attorney, sat near the far end with a slim folder in front of her. Margaret Ellis was there on behalf of Harrison Medical, her reading glasses low on her nose, her expression as pleasant as a tax audit. And at the very end of the table, in the chair Claire had once avoided because it felt too visible, sat Claire herself. For a moment, Ethan stopped walking. It was not dramatic. He did not stumble. He did not drop his portfolio. He simply stopped, and in that stillness, Claire saw the first honest reaction he had given her in months. Surprise, not at her presence alone, but at the fact that she had entered a room without asking his permission to belong in it. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse. No jewelry except the small gold watch her father had given her when she earned her first management promotion years ago. Her laptop was open. Beside it was a binder with labeled tabs, the kind of practical, unglamorous object that had kept Ethan's company alive while he was busy becoming its legend. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his voice controlled but thin. One of the board members, a retired software executive named Linda Carver, gestured toward the empty chair across from Claire. "A review of the Harrison implementation failure and related operational risk." Vanessa sat first, smoothing her notebook on the table. "We are already correcting the messaging issue." Margaret looked over her glasses. "This is not a messaging issue." The sentence landed with the clean finality of a door locking. Ethan lowered himself into his chair. "Claire is no longer with the company. I am not comfortable discussing internal matters with an outside consultant." Claire folded her hands on the table. "Harrison retained Whitestone Strategy Group independently. Your largest client requested my review because the plan they signed was replaced by an accelerated timeline that your team was not prepared to support." Ethan's eyes flicked to Margaret, then to the board. "That timeline was commercially necessary." "It was commercially reckless," Claire said. Her voice was calm, and that calm unsettled him more than anger would have. The original 180-day rollout included staff training, compliance testing, phase permissions, and escalation windows. The 90-day version removed the safeguards while keeping the promises. Linda Carver leaned forward. "How do you know that level of detail?" Claire turned her laptop slightly and projected the first document onto the conference screen. The original Harrison implementation plan appeared, dated 6 weeks before the contract signing. At the bottom, in the document properties, was Claire's name. She clicked again. The pricing model, the risk matrix, the onboarding workflow, the support escalation chart. One by one, the bones of the company appeared on the screen, and each one carried her fingerprints. Patricia Mendez opened her folder. "We also have financial records showing personal funds transferred by Mrs. Whitmore to cover early payroll, archive communications from Mr. Whitmore acknowledging her role in building core systems, and the email chain regarding founder equity consolidation." Ethan's face changed at that. Only slightly, but enough. Vanessa turned toward him. "Founder equity consolidation." Claire did not look at Vanessa. She watched Ethan. The room had gone quiet in the way rooms do when everyone suddenly understands that the polite version of a story has become unusable. Patricia continued, her tone steady. "This meeting is not a divorce proceeding, but any discussion of Claire's alleged lack of contribution would be unwise, especially with a major client present and ongoing contractual exposure." Margaret placed a printed copy of her own email on the table. Harrison signed because of Claire's plan. If Whitmore Tech wants to keep our business, we require independent operational oversight from Whitestone Strategy Group effective immediately. Ethan let out a short breath. You cannot be serious. We are extremely serious, Margaret said. Linda Carver looked from Ethan to Claire, and the disappointment in her expression was almost worse than anger. Ethan, did the board ever receive the original rollout risk assessment? He hesitated. It was not material at the time. Claire clicked one final slide. It showed a timeline of decisions, original plan, revised timeline, marketing announcement, support failures, client escalation. No insults. No emotional language. Just dates, documents, and consequences. It was devastating in the way only well-organized truth can be. After nearly 2 hours, the board voted to create a temporary restructuring committee. Ethan would remain founder, but his operating authority over the Harrison account was suspended. Vanessa's campaign was paused. Whitestone Strategy Group would lead the recovery plan, reporting directly to the board and Harrison. When the meeting ended, no one applauded. Justice in conference rooms rarely comes with music. It comes with people avoiding eye contact while signatures move across paper. Ethan stayed seated as the others filed out. Claire closed her laptop and gathered her binder. You planned this, he said quietly. She paused by the door. No, Ethan. I documented it. His mouth tightened. For years, he had mistaken her patience for weakness, her silence for consent, her love for a blank check. Now the same woman he had tried to reduce to operational support had returned as the only person qualified to repair what his pride had broken. Claire stepped into the hallway, where the blue logo still glowed on the reception wall. For the first time, it did not look like something stolen from her. It looked like something finally telling the truth. 3 months later, the Whitmore Tech logo still glowed blue on the reception wall, but the room beneath it belonged to a different company in every way that mattered. Not legally, not entirely, because lawyers enjoyed keeping simple truths trapped in expensive folders, but spiritually, operationally, practically, it had shifted. The Harrison rollout recovered under Claire's supervision, not with miracles, but with checklists, training calls, revised timelines, and the kind of patient competence that never trended online because it did not wear a fitted suit and call itself visionary. Clinics that had been ready to cancel began submitting clean weekly reports. Support tickets dropped by 40% in 6 weeks. Harrison extended the contract for another year, but only after adding a clause that required Whitestone Strategy Group to oversee any future expansion. The board noticed. Investors noticed. Employees noticed most of all, because employees always know who actually keeps the lights on long before executives are ready to admit it. Ethan remained founder in title, but the word had lost some of its shine. He still had his office, his framed magazine profile, his carefully chosen watch, but people no longer turned toward him automatically when something needed to be solved. They turned toward Claire, or toward the systems Claire had rebuilt so no one person could pretend to be indispensable again. Vanessa left quietly in late spring, accepting a marketing role at a company in Phoenix where, Claire hoped with mild and probably undeserved optimism, someone had already documented the difference between branding and reality. The divorce moved forward more slowly than Ethan had expected. Patricia Mendez filed a response that did not shout, but it did not bend. The evidence was too organized, the contribution trail too clear, and Ethan's original settlement proposal began to look less like fairness and more like an attempt to purchase silence at a discount. Mediation lasted 2 long days in a downtown office where the coffee tasted like warm cardboard and every chair seemed designed by someone hostile to the human spine. In the end, Claire received a significantly larger financial settlement, repayment of her early company contributions, and a negotiated equity interest tied to the value she had helped create. It was not perfect. Real justice rarely is. Real justice usually arrives late, wearing sensible shoes, carrying paperwork, and asking everyone to initial page 17. But it was enough. More than enough, because by then Claire no longer needed Whitmore Tech to define her worth. Whitestone Strategy Group had grown from a used desk near a window into a real firm with 4 clients, 2 contractors, and a small office above a bakery on South Lamar Boulevard, where the smell of cinnamon rolls drifted through the floorboards every morning like proof that capitalism could occasionally apologize. Then came the offer. Whitmore Tech, weakened by operational losses and investor pressure, needed restructuring capital. Claire did not have billionaire money, no convenient prince in a private jet, no absurd fairy tale rescue dropped from the sky, because apparently adults are expected to handle their own plot lines. But Whitestone had leverage, credibility, and Harrison's confidence. With backing from Linda Carver and a small group of investors who preferred functioning companies to founder mythology, Claire negotiated a strategic acquisition of a minority stake with board control over operations. She did not take Ethan's company from him. That was the story he tried to tell himself. The truth was simpler and much less flattering. He had mishandled what she built, and she bought the right to stop him from breaking it completely. On the day the final agreement was signed, Claire walked into the same conference room where Ethan had once placed the divorce papers beside her laptop. The table had been polished. The city lights outside were pale in the late afternoon sun. Ethan stood near the window, thinner than before, his confidence worn down at the edges. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said quietly, "Was this your revenge?" Claire looked at him, and there was no bitterness in her face. That surprised him. It surprised her too, a little. She had carried anger for so long that its absence felt like setting down a bag she had forgotten was cutting into her hand. "No," she said. "Revenge would mean I still cared about hurting you. This is business." Ethan looked away first. Claire signed her name on the last page, not as wife, not as helper, not as the invisible woman behind someone else's applause, but as founder and managing partner of Whitestone Strategy Group. The pen moved smoothly across the paper. Claire Whitmore. Her name, finally, exactly where it belonged. When she stepped out of the building, the Austin evening was warm, and traffic hummed along West 6th Street in its usual impatient rhythm. Her phone buzzed with a message from Allison asking whether she wanted dinner. Claire smiled and looked back once at the glass tower. She did not feel the need to burn it down. She did not need to stand over ruins to know she had survived. Ethan had believed profit made him powerful enough to erase her. He had forgotten that profit was only a number, and numbers could fall. Systems mattered. Trust mattered. Proof mattered. A woman who knew her own value mattered most of all. Claire walked toward her car with the signed agreement in her bag, the bakery office waiting for her in the morning, and a future that did not require anyone else's permission to begin. The first morning in the South Lamar office began without applause, which Claire considered an improvement over most corporate rituals. There was no champagne, no photographer, no founder speech carefully engineered to make exhaustion sound glamorous. There was only a narrow staircase above a bakery, a freshly painted door with Whitestone Strategy Group in dark blue letters, and the smell of cinnamon, yeast, and coffee rising through the floorboards like a small, unreasonable blessing. Claire arrived at 7:30 with a cardboard box of files, a second-hand lamp, and a framed photograph of her father standing beside her at her college graduation, both of them squinting into the Texas sun. The office was modest, just 3 rooms with exposed brick, uneven hardwood floors, and windows that looked down on traffic moving along South Lamar Boulevard. But every lease document carried her signature. Every bank account listed her authority. Every contract template had been reviewed by Patricia Mendez, who had become both attorney and reluctant guardian angel, assuming guardian angels billed by the hour and sent very precise emails. By 8:15, Allison arrived with bagels and a peace lily she claimed was impossible to kill, a statement Claire found suspiciously optimistic given humanity's track record with both houseplants and boundaries. Daniel Price called before 9 to confirm a new referral. Margaret Ellis sent a short message from Harrison, thanking Claire's team for the cleanest expansion planning meeting they had had in years. Claire read it standing beside the window, sunlight catching the edges of dust in the air, and felt a kind of happiness that did not sparkle. It settled. It had weight. It did not depend on anyone clapping. Later that week, Ethan came by the office. He did not enter with confidence this time. He stood just inside the doorway, holding a paper cup of coffee from the bakery downstairs, looking around at the simple desks, the whiteboard covered in process maps, the shelves of labeled client binders. Claire saw him, notice the order of it, the calm productivity, the absence of him. That last part seemed to trouble him most. "It suits you," he said. Once, She would have searched his face for approval and mistaken the smallest kindness for repair. Now she simply nodded. It does. He looked older in the daylight, not ruined, not punished by thunder from above, because life is rarely that theatrical and the universe has terrible pacing. He looked like a man who had been forced to meet the consequences of his own shortcuts and found them less negotiable than investors. I should have handled things differently, he said. Claire waited. There were many ways to respond to an apology shaped like a fog bank. She chose the cleanest one. Yes. Ethan gave a faint, tired smile, as if he had expected more or perhaps less. Do you hate me? The question might have broken her once. It might have opened the old rooms in her heart where she kept every version of them. The duplex kitchen, the cracked laptop, the first investor meeting, the night he cried into her shoulder and said he could not do it without her. But those rooms no longer control the house. Claire looked at him across the small reception area of the company she had built without borrowing his name, his confidence, or his permission. No, she said. I learned from you. He flinched slightly, because the truth can be gentle and still leave a mark. She did not say it to wound him. She said it because it was accurate. Ethan had taught her what happens when love is asked to replace contracts. He had taught her that being useful is not the same as being valued. He had taught her that silence can protect peace for a while, but documentation protects the future. He had taught her, painfully and completely, that a woman can help build an empire and still be pushed outside its gates if her name is not written into the stone. After he left, Claire returned to her desk and opened a proposal for a new client, a small healthcare startup run by two sisters from San Antonio. On the first page, under project leadership, she typed every contributor's name clearly, including the junior analyst who had built the first draft of the workflow chart. It took 10 extra seconds. Civilization somehow survived. That afternoon, she met with her team and said the sentence she wished someone had said to her years earlier. No invisible labor here. If you build it, your name goes on it. The room was quiet for a moment. Then one of the contractors smiled. Claire looked around at their faces, young, tired, hopeful, ambitious in ways that had not yet been punished into caution, and felt the strange responsibility of becoming the kind of leader she once needed. Months later, people would ask whether she had won. Claire never liked the question. Winning sounded too clean for what it cost. She had lost a marriage, a version of herself, and years of believing that loyalty alone could protect what paperwork ignored. But she had gained something harder to steal. Her name on the door, her signature on the contract, her voice in the room, her work attached to her life instead of someone else's legend. And on certain mornings, when the bakery downstairs opened early and Austin sunlight filled the office, Claire would sit at her desk with coffee cooling beside her laptop, listening to the steady hum of a company that did not require her erasure to exist. That was not revenge. That was not even closure. It was something better, something quieter, something no one could hand her and no one could take back. It was ownership.